Joining us from New England is Bill Janovitz, New York Times bestselling author. The newish book is The Cars, Let the Stories Be Told, with the foreword by the band's keyboardist and all-around Renaissance man musician, Greg Hawkes. How are you, sir?
I'm well, thank you. How are you?
I'm great having read this book, and I want to give the fullest of disclosures on full disclosure. I am a huge Cars fan. I wonk out on the history of the band, what went wrong, the different albums, the kind of the short prime of the band, if you say 9 or 10 years after, the monster debut in 1978. So I loved this book. I mean, you really managed to put together where two members have since passed. There's a lot of anecdotal, a lot of interpolation, a lot of going from Cleveland to Boston to Ann Arbor and other places. So props to you, sir.
Oh, thank you so much. Yeah, it's a labor of love.
It is a labor of love, and that brings me to my first point in this, in that you uncover so much in the book, and there's so much candor about pain and dysfunction, which I always suspected. Like, I never knew why the Cars formally disbanded, or why these two, this band of brothers, Benjamin and Rick, who were there since their whatever folkish hippie band in the early 70s, suddenly didn't talk to each other until the other one was on death's doorstep. Um, and I've asked guests this before. It's kind of a jump ball. What is it about suffering and dysfunction and music? I mean, every time I'm in a Kroger and I hear It's All I Can Do or Moving in Stereo and something, I'm hearing the gorgeous dulcet sounds of Benjamin Orr, who was a bassist, striking co-front man. But I also read about the alcoholism. I also read about children who did not grow up in happy households. And this is something that keeps ringing my ear right after I read this book.
Yeah, I don't know if there's anything specifically about music, though. There are theories about mental illness and the arts and depression and, all that kind of stuff that, what attracts people to the arts. And certainly people that most artists have a higher degree of sensitivity. I mean, it's just sort of the job description, I think. But I mean, bands, one of my favorite quotes in the book is from Elliot Easton. He says, bands are such a knucklehead proposition. And it's really just a kind of an offhand way of getting at something fairly deep, which is that bands are unlike almost anything else that you can. There's nothing that you can accurately compare it to. There's no analog. People say it's like a marriage. And listen, as a guy that's been in a band for like almost 40 years, the same band, it's not like a marriage at all. It's more akin to a sibling kind of dynamic. And if you've got five, let's say you have five brothers, like a band like the Cars, and then you didn't necessarily all grow up together, but some of you did. So maybe it's like a blended family, like the Brady Bunch. I've never used that analogy before, but then all of a sudden you're writing together, you're recording together, you're going out on the road together, you've got this business together, but you've got essentially the kinds of personality dynamics that you might have within a family, especially a blended family. So you're navigating all this stuff, and then you mix in somebody's going to have some mental health issues in that five. Given the so what I'm saying? It's like it's just people, and people are going to.
I also think about another favorite, Jerry Raftery. People that there's so many stories of people who've had abusive fathers or were beaten as young people who became distant later on in life. And in this book, there's one quote from Rick Ocasek, the lead singer, the vampire-like personality that a lot of people associate with MTV. He said, I really don't witness much love or emotion between people. He describes his songs and music generally as a way to get beyond loneliness. Just turn on the radio and there it is, a sense of belonging without having to surrender to anybody else's needs.
Right. I mean, he's the driving force of the band. I mean, he's the one that wrote all the songs and co-wrote a few, but for the most part, 99% of everything was his. And so it was his baby. It was his material. And yeah, he was a damaged personality. I mean, as Elliot Easton said, it was like at some point, he said this recently to me. He said, it was like somebody was trying to take something away from him. That's how Rick acted. So it's deep insecurity from an unstable at best childhood and abusive at worst. And you see this. I chart his growth, Rick's in particular. Going from a loner in a basement, developing photos, to a loner in the basement, working on electronics, to a loner in the basement working on demos, all the way until the end of his life.
Right. And so we go back to the early 70s here and the kind of the proto Cars. I think of Milkwood and Captain Swing, right? It pings between Benjamin Orr is a Cleveland person. He's a teen heartthrob singer. He's in all these teen type bands. There was a TV show, and there was this famous picture of him in Time magazine getting a Beatles kind of type hairstyle at age 17. Rick Ocasek is a product of Baltimore, but ends up, Michigan, pinging around everywhere and is a little aimless, but he knows he's kind of headed to the true north of music, and they cross paths. Tell us how that happened. Remind us in this book, because they're very different personalities.
Yeah, Rick's father was originally from Cleveland, and they relocated back there when Rick was in his later teenhood, I think, for his father's job with NASA, I believe. And he sees Ben on TV as in this band called the Grasshoppers, a Beatles-esque one of the bands on this local show called Upbeat, which became a real syndicated kind of shindig type of show where the Grasshoppers would play their own songs, but I'll back other national artists as well, and international artists, in fact. But then a few years later, Rick is at college and then sort of kicking around Bowling Green University and also just hanging out in Columbus, Ohio, eventually, and that's where they cross paths in the sort of music scene. At this point, Rick really he's really influenced by the Velvet Underground and Dylan and just beat poetry in particular, and wants some sort of vehicle to write and to become this sort of poetic songwriter. And he recognizes in Ben a natural lightness to his darkness and a natural musician, a guy that could play any instrument, sing anything in one take and sound like Paul McCartney or whoever he wanted to sound like. I mean, just a natural. And Rick is anything but sort of a natural. He's angular, he's gawky, he's tall, he's got this sort of quirky at best voice. So they they form this duo, and they go through various iterations for 10 years before the Cars finally coalesce.
And it was a real wilderness in the 1970s. And I don't think the people around Rick in that ecosystem, pinging between all these cities and the Boston underground music scene, even knew that he was already a father.
His own band in the Cars, until their second record, Greg Hawkes talks about not knowing about this other family, about that Rick left 2 sons and a wife in Ohio before he came to Boston with Suzanne, who was his wife from the early 70s until he met Paulina Porizkova in 83, I guess. Greg talks about about Rick saying something about his son coming to meet them. He's like, "Son, what? How old is he? Wait, I think your son is only."
But he also feigned his age. He also had this knack for always slicing 5 or 6 years off his age. Rick, if everybody remembers Rick Ocasek, the quintessential kind of 80s MTV vampire Dracula look, gigantic Adam's apple. Paulina Porizkova describes him as his wife and his ex-wife now describes him as an upside down exclamation mark. and Ben was the antithesis of that. Ben, the band's debut in 1978, just a gorgeous blonde front man. If you hear Just What I Needed and some of the other songs. And a lot of people who just ambiently listen to the Cars always assumed that Rick was the lead man because his personality was always out front and center.
Well, that was somewhat by design, or not somewhat. It was by design, as you read about the machinations by himself and their manager Elliot Roberts to make Rick the front man. Even though, as you say, Ben sang at least half of their early hits and half of their early songs, really, and then a lot of their hits, including Drive, which starts off with Ben in the video, but quickly navigates to this drama between Rick and Paulina, which is the video on which he met Paulina. But yeah, I mean, they really edged the rest of the band out, and it was sort of gradual and somewhat insipid, insidious, I should say, as time went on. Whereas if you read the Mike Campbell book called Heartbreaker about Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers, there's a lot of parallels. It's the same manager, Elliot Roberts. It was way more overt and blunt and immediate in that band. Here it was more of a what the hell's going on kind of thing,
And so not at all preordained that they would have this breakthrough smash album in 1978, their debut album, The Cars. And a lot of blood, sweat, and tears went into that. Non-correlating assets, as we call them in investing circles. It's not just that Rick and Ben were complementary and they were kind of friends and tight-ish bandmates for much of the 1970s, but you bring in Greg Hawkes, more of a cerebral, calm keyboardist. He could play the sax, he could platoon on bass and do various other things. There doesn't seem to be any love lost between Rick Ocasek and the drummer kind of from the proto-punk scene,
David Robinson.
Yeah. And then Elliot Easton, the guitarist, very virtuosic. I love some of these licks and everything, but he was always being looked down on for whatever inertia it was. They came together and they brought someone like a Roy Thomas Baker, like legendary, recently departed Roy Thomas Baker, to bring out this debut album, which just, you illustrated it time and again. People put that first spin on. They're like, what is this? And they get a backing from a really enthusiastic DJ in Boston, Maxine Sartoro, and the band breaks it mega in 1978.
Yeah, Maxine Sartori is her name. She was all of 21 or so when she was recruited by the very influential Boston radio station WBCN, one of the early pioneering FM rock stations, freewheeling. DJs could play whatever they want. Not only did she almost single-handedly break Aerosmith on the radio, but she really helped the careers of breakthroughs of Springsteen and Queen. And then she was playing Just What I Needed, the demo of that song by the Cars before they had any label, and they started having lines around the block just for such legendary clubs as the Rat in Boston, which was our CBGB here in Boston. And they would like have two shows, so the buzz was gigantic, and people were recalling and requesting this demo, and they were reporting it on the Gavin and other charts, the national charts. So other stations would say, "What the hell is this? We got to find out about this." So before they even entered the studio, so yeah, Roy Thomas Baker, fresh off of huge hits with Queen, among others. Gets into the studio, takes them into the studio, Air Studios in London, George Martin's studio, and they're put up at this beautiful house in Mayfair.
And I love the scene of him showing up with his cutlery in a briefcase, like his napkins and his finery. Very virtuosic. You're paying me premium.
He's just the true English eccentric and played it to the hilt. He was a genuine eccentric, but really hammed it up. And what a character! But an amazing sonic engineer, like a guy that took what they already had, which was they had everything together, all the arrangements, everything was meticulously arranged, ready to go. They didn't mess around with that kind of stuff at all. They just, basically put it into CinemaScope, with Roy Thomas Baker's help. He was one of the first guys to have a 40-track machine, along with the subject of my previous book, Leon Russell. These are 40-track machines in the days when 24 was real state-of-the-art, cutting edge, way before digital, of course, when unlimited tracks.
What is that effect called, like from Bohemian Rhapsody or Bicycle, where it sounds like a 40-person British chorus is doing it?
Yeah,
and they brought that aesthetic to the Cars.
Yeah, I mean, you watch these old sort of videos, the breakdowns that George Martin would do with the Beatles, where they're working with 4 tracks, but they talk. He's showing you like how many things are on one track, like they were bouncing down other things to that track, which means you commit to that as a sub mix, right? That's the mix. So when you take all those flutes and backgrounds and put them on one track to free up the other 3 tracks, well, I mean, Roy was doing that now with 16 and then 24 tracks. And then he was linking 2 24-track machines together, which is a little tricky. So you had to be in sync so you could have all those other tracks to work with. So with the Cars, he finally had a machine that was 40 tracks, but still he would have the 3 of he would have Greg, Elliot, and Ben go out and sing the backup, say, for example, and then he would have them all do a unison part. Then he would all have them double unison part. Then he would have them triple unison part. Then he would do that all with maybe 2 more harmonies. So that at some point there's like 40 or 50 voices coming in on "Good Times Roll." But unlike Queen, where it was like sort of baroque and grandiose from the go, with the Cars, it's like this sparse thing, and all of a sudden it explodes. I kind of liken it to like what a poodle looks like. It's like, if you could visualize it, it's like just this sleek shaved poodle, but then all of a sudden the tail kind of just like puffs out like that.
And that's why it was so blindsiding. Nobody had ever heard anything like it.
Yeah, and it's the first track on the record, right? You put the needle down.
You could bucket it with new wave, proto-punk, whatever you wanted to call back then, but it just didn't exist in the power of the sense. And this is an indulgent question, but I got to say, you do a great job about hashtagging and time stamping specifically songs or little interplays where the bassist and drummer just get each other, right? Like on Bye Bye Love and others. The one song is probably my favorite song, and it's such a layer cake of a song, and it's so beautiful and it's underrated. It's part 2 of Moving in Stereo, who everybody remembers from Phoebe Cates and Fast Times at Ridgemont High, but all mixed up, which I can never get that song out of my head. We'll play an excerpt. It's so beautiful, so layered. It's Benjamin Orr transmogrifying, kind of telling this heartache story of Rick Ocasek's. It may or may not be about B.B. Buell or some other person who dished heartbreak material to him, but then you have saxophones come in, you have the chorus in the background. It's really like nothing else out there, and I'm still haunted by that quote by Ocasek saying that I'm just a lonely person and I need music as comfort, or it seems to have been transcribed from a poem that maybe he left somewhere.
Yeah, I mean, B.B. Buell says that it was he had sent it to her in prose form. I all of these accounts you have to sort of take with a grain of salt, and a lot of people saw themselves in Drive, for example, including B.B. And I'm not saying it's true or not. I'm just like, well, you've got it's like everybody sort of chiming in saying, I had this conversation with Rick, and it's probably all true because as a songwriter, you're just picking up. You're not writing a nonfiction fact-checked history here. You're writing a song, which is like you're taking pieces from your life as influences. But that song, All Mixed Up, it's pretty distinctive on a distinctive album. It's like if that was their first song, you would think, okay, this is not necessarily some cutting edge band. It kind of fits more in with the tenor of the late '70s, I think, which has got a bit of a soft rock vibe. It could have been an Al Stewart song, but maybe sort of amped up a little bit with some great, edgier guitar. But it's not really a new wave song as you think of like some of these others where the synth is interacting with the guitar and you've got this sort of angular vocal kind of style. It's not like that. It's pretty soft. It's kind of a soft focus song in a lot of ways.
It's super vulnerable too.
Yeah.
And I think of just like Baker Street, like you didn't expect the sax to come.
Baker
you also
Street,
didn't expect Greg Hawkes to break out in sax to close this song. Anyway, it's a great listen, but it tends to be footnoted off of a legendary album. I mean, how many people debut like this? Maybe, Nirvana and Nevermind in terms of the big scene. Like everybody keeps.
Well, Nevermind wasn't their debut album, so you got to go back to like. You got to go back to like Zeppelin 1 or something like that. It's like stuff that comes out fully formed. Like nobody, like I really liken it to Zeppelin 1 because Zeppelin 1 took so many people by surprise that they reacted in such extreme ways. Like I was talking to, not to digress too much here, but I was talking to Glenn Johns, the engineer. I'm like, what didn't George Harrison or Mick Jagger get about Led Zeppelin? It's like it just seemed. And it's like, it was so bombastic and so new, and with this wailing banshee of a vocal. Anyway, it's a kind of it's not that the Cars were as extreme as like Kraftwerk or Devo or Suicide, their influences. They in fact took those influences and presented them in a very pop sheen. But there was something like, where did these guys come from kind of vibe,
Full disclosure, I'm Robin Farzad. Our guest joining us from New England is Bill Janovitz. He's a New York Times bestselling author of Leon Russell. The latest book is The Cars, Let the Stories Be Told, about the flame that burnt for the better part of a decade, and they did come back after Benjamin Orr passed away for one final reunion in 2011. So they were put on this glide path well into the 80s, and it dovetailed, really perfectly with the launch of MTV. Was it August of 1981 that was the first day of MTV? And I remember his face, his personality, everything that very much reminded me of the fascination of seeing MTV. We didn't have cable. I had to go to my friend Ross's house. His mother was out on dates, and we'd be able to watch these things. And again, it's really difficult for a person who is not very social, who's very particular about these things, to be brought into that super extroverted mix. Rick Ocasek did not like touring, right? For starters. And, when you say get on a stage, put on a prop, do these things for the TV, I'm surprised that he is as synonymous with MTV as he was, in spite of the fact that they all hated doing music videos.
Well, I don't know if they all did. I mean, there was definitely some healthy skepticism, but like Tom Petty and those guys who didn't want to appear on these sort of variety shows like the Merv Griffith show or something, these corny shows, you could just send in a video, right? This is before MTV. So Devo were really into making videos. I mean, Jerry Casale was basically a filmmaker, artist. So they saw it as a means of expression. So when the time did to make these sort of promo clips, is what they were maybe calling them back then, well, then Rick was really influenced by Devo and into Devo, as was Greg Hawkes, who shouted out to them at their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame
Hall of Fame.
induction speech. Yeah. So they looked to Jerry, and Jerry came and had never met the Cars, and spent probably a week or two, or if not more, making 2 videos for their Panorama record, which predates MTV. This is 1980.
Yeah.
And yeah, so they make these 2 really cool scripted videos, not performance videos, actually acted out, and they're fantastic. It's for Panorama, the song, and Touch and Go. It's 2 great videos. So they really, and you can see all of the band sort of more or less equally distributed and acting through these videos. But then MTV came around, and yeah, it was like this, like you said, there's a bit of a tension between like, do we want to do this? Do we want to be in these? But like, Rick, I think, really did embrace it as an alternative to touring, especially when MTV kind of really exploded, which was more or less overnight. MTV just like, especially as cable did start to reach more homes, of course. Then it was like, by their next record, Shake It Up, they're blanketing MTV, but they were the beneficiaries of having like a few videos already done. So when MTV was like launched, there really was not that much stuff to put on. So you'd see the same thing over and over again. And at some point when people of our generation look back to and think of MTV, the Cars is one of the first bands I think of,
Right. And I actually lament, I'll say, into the great abyss. Why did they leave Shooting for You on the cutting room floor on Panorama? That's a great track. You can catch it. Anyway, there's so many. I warned everybody I'm going to wonk out on this because it's the closest thing that I have to a kind of a customer service call about my passion.
On the note of MTV, though, it's important to note that the Cars won the first Video Music Award for Best Video, beating out Thriller. Finally, Thriller was getting all these awards, and when it came down to the prize of the night, the Cars were almost ready to go. I think they might have been at the bar at this point. They get called. They won the video. So, yeah, they won the award.
Well, Bill, you also came closest to answering the question, which I'm sure Rick and Ben got in their entire lives, is how do you guys decide who goes on lead vocals? Is it a coin flip? I mean, sometimes he would self-effacingly, Rick, say, when we needed the great singer and the handsome guy, I'd put him out there. But I think of great songs like Dangerous Type or Shake It Up, which they may not have loved, which is Rick's vocals, or other songs where he comes in. How did they hash that on the back? Because you illustrate Ben as a kind of a chill, almost to the point of a fault passive, would show up with a cigarette, drink some bourbon. Yeah, I'm here to play bass, whatever you need.
Yeah.
And there has to be some agency to that. Somebody has to opt in and say, no, this is mine.
Well, it was almost like that particular dynamic really gets to who these 2 guys were together. And a lot of it was just that this is like their little thing, like all the guys in the band would say, we weren't really privy to those conversations, but we would go see Rick bouncing stuff off of Ben, and Ben nodding and Rick were just saying, well, why don't you try this one vocal? So, I mean, it's funny because I talk about like how many people casual fans don't realize that there were 2 lead vocalists in this band. And it's funny to think of that because they have such different voices. It's like when you're a kid, you don't realize that there's all these different guys in the Beatles singing, whether
right.
until Ringo sang, maybe you were like, but then you start to hear the distinctions of the voices. You're like, oh, geez, yeah, they're really. I can't believe I couldn't hear that before, right? So once you become conscious of it, but I think it was just a real simple thing with them. It was their most natural thing, and nevertheless, as the records progress, Ben is even edged out a bit more on that. He's no longer getting 50% of the songs to sing, and they were all Rick's songs, a reminder. So Rick, I think, just started to see himself as more of Rick Ocasek and the Cars, like Tom Petty and the Heartbreakers.
And then let's fast forward to, what is it, 84, 85? I'm thinking, is it Heartbeat City?
Yeah, 84, yeah.
84, and Mutt Lange brought in. Mutt Lange, notorious and elusive music man who did Def Leppard and other bands coming in. We've talked about it before. Several months ago, we had Thomas Dolby on the show talking about his experiences with Def Leppard and Dolby being brought in for some keyboard cuts. When you bring in somebody like Mutt Lange, that is a band-breaking, back-breaking exercise. His perfectionism, his intervention, I would imagine you have to be really strong as a band to survive the level of iteration, the level of dressing down, the level of interdiction, And in many ways, this was a turning point for the band. For as globally successful as that album was, if you think about the song Drive, if you think about the scenes from Ethiopia and how iconic that song was from the 80s, and Paulina meeting and marrying Rick, there was tremendous frustration and a schism forming within the band.
Yeah, I mean, even a successful band to have a 10-year run is sort of like that's pretty much kind of the shelf life. If you exceed that, then you're managing to make these micro adjustments and macro adjustments, frankly, as time goes. But to have the same 5 guys, I mean, so that aside, to get that far and to get 5 records, no matter. No matter, but it's just sort of the success, of course, helps this. So they were successful right out of the gate with their first record. So, that goes a long way to keeping 5 people together in a collaborative team like this. But their first 4 records were done with their 6th member, which is Roy Thomas Baker. He's like there every step of the way with them. He's adapting with them. He's adjusting with them. He's helping them. But yeah, it was pretty easy. But they decide, and by most accounts in the band, it's Rick deciding that he wants to really go for it here. Get a huge hit. And apparently they were really into what Mutt did with AC/DC, which was sort of peak organic rock production, as I say in the book. But between that, the AC/DC and the interim, he had done Pyromania by Def Leppard and others. But Pyromania was a worldwide
massive album in 1983. Was up against Michael Jackson's Thriller. I remember it was the big story of '83.
Yeah, and this was kind of an AC/DC like band when they started, but they were much more malleable. They were younger. Mutt was unlike kind of a de facto 6th member that Roy Thomas Baker was, just sort of in the background. He was in the forefront of making the record Pyromania and their other records with Def Leppard. He was involved. He was writing the songs. He was singing. He's listed as a co-writer on maybe all the songs on that record. I don't really know, but now he's faced with this band that's established in a gigantic way, the Cars, and he's trying to use and he's also gotten, very importantly, he's gotten really into peak early digital, from peak organic analog to like early digital, which was still working through all kinds of issues, and people losing whole albums, like New Order lost a whole album. Well, they lost all of Blue Monday, for example, in a computer thing, so. It's taking, stuff that should be easy is taking longer and longer, but he's descending into this minutia in sort of driving himself. It turns out, his engineer, Mike Shipley, described it as kind of a nervous breakdown. He really lost all, and he was driving everybody else sort of crazy. And it was, as Greg Hawkes says in the book, there was no detail that Mutt wouldn't happily spend 3 weeks on. There was no detail too small that he wouldn't spend 3 weeks on. And so that you have this natural singer, Ben Orr, who could go in and do everything in 1 or 2 takes, now concentrating on syllables and breaths and coming back 3 days in a row to try to get the bass to sound exactly like Mutt hears it in his head. And
it's enough to drive you to drink.
Yeah.
Hold that thought.
Yeah.
Full disclosure, stay with us. Full Disclosure airs on NPR, Spotify, YouTube, all of the fine podcatchers. We're on social media, whether Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook. Handle is Full D Radio. You can give a shout out to our radio listeners, all of you, on WVTF Radio IQ across the great Commonwealth of Virginia. That's NPR's news source in Virginia. We have KPPQ in Ventura, California. Where else are we? We are on WPBM in Asheville, North Carolina. Holler if you too would like us on your air. And a quick reminder that we're hosting the Pope of American Cuisine, Chef Patrick O'Connell, the Inn at Little Washington, a Michelin luminary, on November 9th at the Virginia Museum of History and Culture. You can get tickets at the Virginia Museum's website. Again, Chef Patrick O'Connell, the Inn at Little Washington, on Full Disclosure Live. He's turning 80 on November 9th. We're hosting him for Full Disclosure Live. Please join us. If you're just joining us, my esteemed guest is Bill Janovitz. He is the New York Times bestselling author of Leon Russell, The Master of Space and Time's Journey Through Rock and Roll History, The Rolling Stones' Exile on Main Street, and Rocks Off, 50 tracks that tell the story of the Rolling Stones. Most urgently for this interview, he's author of The Cars, Let the Stories Be Told. I didn't mean to bury the lead. Let's go back. Was it the song of the summer of 1984, Magic by the Cars?
Yeah,
Which
I believe it was a summer hit. Yeah.
you would not believe how much airplay that got. I just remember being in my dad's car and the radio. It was like every other song. Elektra really did its job. I don't know if it was pale or anything, but in hindsight, it really does sound like Def Leppard. And it really does have the Mutt Lange imprimatur, like, oh, you could see that with Billy Ocean, with Def Leppard, with all the various other peoples. You almost imagine him coming in and singing, which would have been unthinkable for a band of this caliber. But the video, and you tell the story, it was filmed at the Hilton estate out west, and they built this clear platform under the pool. It's when Rick walks on water. It's kind of cringy to watch it nowadays, but what is most telling is you don't see any of the other band members. It's all about Rick. It's Rick in this kind of messianic walking on water thing, and there's a lot of or foreshadowing and foreboding in that.
Right. I mean, it's a bit tongue in cheek. The director came up with that idea, and but but it really is kind of on the nose, as we say, for Rick's personality at that point, especially sort of as this record developed and became even more of a hit. But yeah, you see the band for I think a total of 30 seconds, and they're literally in a corner of the outside patio of the house, and you can really barely discern who's who in there. And then for the next video on this, I don't know if it's the next one, but one of the biggest videos of their career is Drive. And the band is shown as mannequins behind the bar, sort of at the end of the video. And the lead singer, Ben, is only shown in the opening kind of crane shot. And then it turns to this drama between Rick and Paulina, which is the video on which they fell in love. So, yeah, it's indicative of the whole thing for sure.
But I also think of the split screen of a massive concert across the entire world, people being flown on Lear jets in the Concorde in Philadelphia and London, and that's Benjamin Orr singing Drive.
Yeah,
that is the
Live Aid
guy. That's not Live Aid. That's not Rick walking on water, and that's Martha Quinn fawning over Benjamin Orr, who said he couldn't make his casting on Miami Vice.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
So there was some subtle pushback. He was still the gorgeous voice of Drive. And a lot of this attention, and Rick trying to take the stage and Rick trying to consolidate marketing with the help of this other manager, was it Elliot Roberts, right?
Yeah.
The face of the band thing, this would be the last stand for a while. They would go off and do their solo work after this.
Well, they did one more record, which was I said if all of their records had a purpose, because they were talking about like every record had a purpose, and if I kind of what's the word, snidely, but more or whatever, a little too tritely say, well, if the purpose to exist for Drive, it was, Door to Door, which is the next record, it was basically to be the nail in the coffin for the band. It was the band. It was the first album they go in with all retreaded songs that were rejects from the previous records they had.
And the drummer, I mean, to have somebody as well respected and beloved as David Robinson, they effectively set down the you didn't have to do any drumming.
Yeah, that started on Heartbeat City.
Hit a cymbal for the entire album, and
Yeah, and this is a guy who had no real ego about drums. He was open to learning drum machine stuff and patterning that stuff. He just wanted to be in a band, and he had been doing that since Panorama. But Heartbeat City was kind of a real test case, because he said he didn't even play any drum. At various times he said he played one drum, once each time it was sampled, and then he spent the rest of the 8 months sitting around, basically, and trying to program the Fairlight computer. Yeah, but with Door to Door, yeah, it was all drum machine stuff, as was some of their later, sort of their comeback record, I should say. But yeah, that was the record. I mean, Heartbeat City was really the beginning of the end. It was the writing was on the wall. They didn't take any time off really when they should have, instead of sort of breaking it up. But Rick was he moved to New York. He was obsessed with Paulina. His marriage was breaking up. Ben was descending into substance abuse and depression, and there was this tension. It's like if you have this record where Rick has no new songs, why not be open to finally collaborating with your bandmates? And apparently Ben had a lot of music to work with. He wasn't a great lyricist, probably. Well, he wasn't a great lyricist.
Rick was openly dismissive of that, right? So when The Lace, Benjamin Orr's solo album, comes out in their kind of intermission between the Nail in the Coffin and Heartbeat City. What's always amazing to me in the duality of this is Rick rabbied so many great bands, and you hear from behind the scenes how supportive and sometimes tear in his blue eyed he was about it, but he was openly dismissive of the band individual band members' self determination. I mean, could you imagine that you'd want a cut of the publishing or songwriting, or gosh, your girlfriend, fiance wants to write? That's not going to happen. And I think they wised up to the fact by 1987 that there were control issues, and if the output wasn't virtuosic, if everybody hated the album that hit in 1987, that what is even the point of this?
Yeah, I mean, David Robinson was the curmudgeon of the band. He was definitely the squeaky wheel. So, I mean, you've got this dynamic. You've got the two brotherly guys, basically more or less the same age, Ben and Rick, who come out together. Greg was this just sort of very diplomatic guy, somewhere in the middle, a real middle child kind of guy. And then you've got Elliot, who's the youngest by 9 years between him and Rick. I mean, 9 years difference. But David had brought the band almost instant cred when he joined, because he had been in the Modern Lovers with Jonathan Richman. He had been in this great band called DMZ in Boston, very well regarded proto-punk garage band.
I mean, the aesthetic as an artist, as a gallery person, the aesthetic of the band, the album covers,
that was all David, and he
put in was David.
Yeah, and Rick saw him, rightfully so, as a check on his power, and of course Rick sort of did this Machiavellian kind of move as early as "Shake It Up," their fourth record, to sort of like start to edge David out. But then, yeah, to cut back to what we're talking about with Ben, which is the sort of crucial relationship in the band, the partnership that had been together for 10 years before the band. Yeah, he was really dismissive and condescending and all of that stuff. But you're right. Rick was a different guy to different people. He was later on, when he was producing Not a Surf, Weezer, Guided by Voices, he had
they invariably love him.
Yeah, and so did Suicide and Bad Brains, who he was working with sort of during the height of the Cars. David Frick from Rolling Stone posited that maybe this was Rick, specifically with like the Bad Brains and Suicide, these very edgy avant-garde underground bands. Perhaps he was doing penance with them of some for his commercial sort of top 40 success. But yeah, he really edged out Ben, and Ben really internalized a lot of that and externalized some of it, unfortunately, later. So it was kind of an explosion that was due to happen.
When did the band formally or informally break up? Was it 1988?
87-ish, yeah.
And so it haunts the heck out of me as a Cars fan. And you can go on YouTube and watch it. When they did come together again in 2000, and Benjamin Orr was diagnosed in the spring of 2000 with pancreatic cancer, and he's given a few months left to live. He had gone off, was drinking quite a bit. He had relationships that failed. You illustrate a kind of a gun fetish and a camouflage fetish, all these striations of darkness that I just didn't know about behind the scenes and talking to people and the incredible reporting you've done. But to see that tableau of the band brought together with a dying member, which, he's in this Cleveland Browns jersey. He's bone thin. He might be, 90 pounds. And to his credit, when he got that diagnosis, Benjamin Orr wanted to go on the road with his smaller bands, Big People and the others. But this was incredibly telling and incredibly disconcerting to watch in the band's dynamic. Like, you let all that time transpire. It's completely an open question if the Cars could have survived the late 80s, if they could have really shored up their act and survived like REM and U2 and the others did who evolved. But for them to come together under this kind of, a Rhino Records video for a mini featurette, it's a real gut punch to watch. And you realize that 12, 13 years had already transpired and Benjamin Orr was near death.
Yeah, and it's 13 sort of crucial years in given their ages. They had now sort of transcended into sort of middle age, a little older. Benjamin looks absolutely harrowingly skeletal. This is a guy who, like I said, always seemed like he was in soft focus, round, just baby-faced, beautiful man. And they were so shocked by it and you can kind of see the shock in the video. And it's a hard video, obviously, to watch. But Greg Hawkes speaks about it like you could see it. Greg really looks like he's seen a ghost in the video,
Yeah.
and he never really recovers from seeing Ben in that condition. They knew he was sick. They just didn't. They hadn't seen the level of it or depth of it. They didn't realize it until they saw him, and it's a great interview. Otherwise, with Brett Milano as the moderator, as the interviewer, but Greg, at least, and I think David agreed that they said, if there's ever a documentary, which there probably will be about the band, then that shouldn't be used, should not be used, because they feel almost like not that they were ambushed with it, but they were so taken by surprise that they almost feel like that it shouldn't have been. But what could they have done? They were there,
What else have you learned about the potential hatchet burying behind the scenes, or meeting on the sides, or the dinner beforehand? Because at this point, I mean, things are very late. He's in a wheelchair. He's playing for time. There's an oxygen tank, right? He's doing the unthinkable. He did ultimately end up weeks later in the hospice and died.
Yeah,
In
the reason they were shooting it in Atlanta was to make it easy on him to not have to travel. So they knew he was really sick. But yeah, I don't. So I don't know how far into you want to get into the interview. I mean, there were machinations on and reaching out on Rick's part during the '90s to try to get back in touch with Ben, but Ben was done with Rick, and Ben's exes talk about these various olive branches, and Ben being shut off to it, and Ben starting to shut himself off really from a lot of past friends, and really starting to close him off in an heretofore uncharacteristically way. It was sort of out of character with him. But all of the guys, the three survivors, talk about like they hope that they could see those guys go off and talk to each other, Ben and Rick. So they don't know the content of the conversation, but they like to imagine that, there was the hatchet being buried, and that.
And refresh my memory, you did excerpt in the book that Ben didn't say a lot. I mean, he was watching and he had the sunglasses on, and yes, Greg looked ashen, and Elliot was trying to tell old stories and be, I think, the levity in that. Again, I'm wonking out on this, but Ben did say something when he was asked in a very flip way, what was it like, I think, to be like the heartthrob of the band and everything. And he's essentially, for the first time, saying, you don't know what it's like when you go off the stage.
Oh, he said, everybody thinks it's I don't have the quote in front of me, but it's, then you leave the stage, and it's almost Shakespearean, right? It's like you leave the stage, and then you're back to being just sort of, nobody sees who you are when you're off the stage, this sadness kind of thing,
And then people learned belatedly after he did pass away that he sponsored people for college. He sponsored medical bills. This is a guy, people will tell you, as Elliot Easton told you, that a guy would just show up with his snowplow in New England and plow the road and do generous things, or bring a whole coterie of people from Cleveland to the concerts and the like. And that legend, then grew. I'm fast forwarding now to 2011, when the band finally did get together for Move Like This. I mean, I thought it was a respectable album. It had that one song that was played on late night, but I was stunned to see how little Ocasek gave up on the whole Control thing. I thought he would be more magnanimous. He's like, we're getting together. He gave interviews and said, I'm doing this to show my sons that I still have it in me. But it was an unpleasant experience on balance, especially for Elliot Easton and the others, that these old Control habits don't die hard.
Well, I think just for Elliot Easton, because David said, Rick was being nice for all of a sudden, and it was like back to like being on the first record when we were all like sort of like friends again. Like all that stuff had been in the past, and of course there was the unspoken, or perhaps spoken at the time, absence of Ben, and there was sort of let's do this before we get too old and lose another one kind of vibe. But there was always this weird tension between Rick and Elliot. Elliot always wanted Rick's approval. Rick saw guitars as somewhat archaic.
Objectively, his guitar work is amazing. I don't care if you call it honky tonk or licks in a dive bar. Like all the kid was looking for, and I say kid because he's younger than him, was some modicum of affirmation or confirmation from Rick Ocasek, and he'd get dissed both in person and in the trades and in the press. And you'd think that, is it that hard for you to just, I'm sorry, it's like I'm complaining to customer
Well, no,
the
I mean
HR about them.
it's a great little capsule of the Cars dynamic, and like I said, like I don't know if you've got siblings, but like those dynamics are set early. You can kind of think you worked through it, and you're like now a mature adult, and you can, but then all of a sudden it flares up, and you go, oh, there it is again. It's never gone, right? And with this in particular, you've got David going, this is fantastic, and Rick was nice again, and then you've got Elliot going, that record was bullshit. Rick was blah 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 again. He was like he edged me out completely. He had, for the first time ever on a Cars record, he had somebody else play the guitar parts, and it was Garrett Jackknife Lee, Jackknife Lee, the producer, who I'm sure he was not caught up in this. He was just like, Rick had asked him to put down some guitar parts. Yeah. And he had no idea what he was walking into. But Elliot holds that record in great disdain. And some of the quotes apparently, so David was talking, and Greg were talking about some of the quotes they saw in fan forums or something after that record, because now we're like into the internet age.
Yeah, where's Elliot?
They're saying, I thought we would miss Ben, but I really missed Elliot.
Well, they did miss Ben, and they didn't hire a bassist specifically because of that, and they had people come in and do some other parts in electronic bass. But then I will fast forward from this to their Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction. And in between, I mean, in the early aughts, there was a single that Rick Ocasek put out. Was it Shining Star or Silver? About Ben.
Silver, yeah.
And if you do read the lyrics, there is... Paulina does say that he was always scared and heartbroken and a bit devastated, to the sense that he evinces any emotion about what happened. You can't go back and reclaim those 12 lost years when they weren't talking to one another. They started off as friends. They were battery mates, he would always say in interviews. But, by the time you saw the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame induction, which to me was amazing, you had Benjamin Orr's son, who's like a ringer for him. You had Brandon Flowers of the Killers with the speech and inducting them into that. All of them saying that, Ben's spirit would have been here tonight. We're in the town of Cleveland. It was a great valedictory, but I was always wondering, and again, we're wonking out, but this tells you a lot, why the front man went out of his way to be talking on stage while Elliot Easton, his guitarist, was giving a heartfelt speech about his emotions, his mom, Benjamin Orr. Like, who does that? The world is watching you. It's going to be watched on YouTube ad infinitum. This is the ultimate honor for the Cars. They're invoking Ben. I know things are going wrong behind the scenes. Paulina had already left him. Could it have been just like an accidental slight? Because I can't imagine who on a stage while your bandmate is giving a speech does that.
Even if it's accidental, it's so tone deaf and so... it's like you look at Brandon Flowers and he's getting.
He wants to get out of that.
It's like when you're at a singer-songwriter show in a quiet little intimate venue and there's somebody shouting in your ear while you're both watching the performance. And you're like looking at everybody watching you go like, hush, I'm like, it's not me, it's this guy next to me. But Brandon's like, this is his hero barking in his ear while this other hero of his is trying to give, like you said, an amazing heartfelt speech where he's including everybody that's really influenced and helped the Cars, including his own bandmates. But there's Elliot. I'm sorry, rather there's Rick. Now, when Rick gets up after that to give his own speech, he thanks everybody but Elliot. It's like this crazy thing. It's like. And I mentioned it to Paulina Portiskova, and she says, "Oh, I never noticed that. I was too hung up on the fact that he never really thanked me." And their marriage was at that time just starting to break up, I guess. But oh God, it's just the pettiness and smallness of a human being, and the insecurities that linger, and that family stuff that I talk about. It never goes away, I guess, for some people.
But you also see those songs inform things like, Misfit Kid, Dangerous Type, some of the other, all mixed up, that those neuroses and those deficiencies. This is the paradox. I don't want to sound like a, drugstore psychotherapist or anything. Like, without that suffering, without that dysfunction, you could not get the unique flavor.
Well, I mean,
of the Cars at their peak.
Elliot, yeah, and Rick was fully aware of that, and it reminds me of a quote that Elliot said that it's not in the book, I guess, but I might have learned this after the book was written. Elliot said, he did talk to Rick after that, before it was a short year-ish before Rick passed away himself, and Elliot said, man, the fact that you did that really hurt me. It really hurt me a lot. And Rick said, "I don't need to be." It's sort of like the line in These Days by Jackson Brown. It's like, I don't need to be reminded of my failures. I don't need to be reminded of my deficiencies. It wasn't really an overt apology. It was basically, I know I've got these deficiencies.
And I read that, and I think Split Screen, as I told you, we had Not a Surf live on our show in 2019. It's a great pre-pandemic memory in the autumn of 2019, after Rick Ocasek had passed away. And Matthew Cause of Not a Surf, his band, which was really produced by Rick Ocasek and Elektra in the mid-90s and went big on MTV in the mid-90s. He shared that story in that obit on NPR, and you had it in the book as well, when he had the audacity to hand him Outside the Knitting Factory or something, his mixtape. And then he has this message on his answering machine, and he shows up. And Paulina says the same thing. When he had this group of apprentices or proteges under him, he would be this doting dad. You would see this tenderness in his eyes. He loved having those kids over as long as they didn't question his mastery.
Paulina was unbelievably generous in her time and her memories, but she was also so articulate in providing her insights. And she said, and she's obviously given this a lot of thought, but she said Rick mistook adoration for love, or vice versa. So as long as somebody was there looking up to him and giving him that sort of adoration as this guy from the Cars, this legend, he gave love back, right? That's what he thought of as love. But, cut to a marriage that's been together for more than a decade, 2 decades. And, as people grow older, we know it's not just about adoration in marriage after, let's say the honeymoon is over, right? I mean, it's like you've got work to do to maintain that. And he was not up to that emotional task.
Bill, did he know he was dying?
Yeah.
Or was that sudden? Because she illustrated it as,
well, again,
I was making him cookies. We were separated, but I was making him cookies. He recently had a small, tiny bit of cancer taken off his lung. He was smoking again, anecdotally, but he died suddenly and in bed in his Gramercy house of a combination of emphysema and clogged arteries. And it was very sudden for the rest of the world who'd just seen him at the Rock Hall. I mean, he clearly didn't look like his 1980 self, but it just came out of nowhere.
Well, again, so we didn't really delve too deep into Rick's secretness, but this is sort of defined who he was. We talked about his compartmentalization of the past. So we hinted at it, but it was the theme through his life. And I mean, when he died, there were newspapers printing corrections of his age because he had kept that secret for so long and so successfully. But Paulina was saying that she came across some heart medicine in his duffel bag or something. She was unaware of her own husband. This is when things were not completely falling apart yet. Just being out on vacation together and seeing him taking heart medication. She had
the antidepressants. The other
antidepressants. Yeah, medication for sure. She didn't know he was dealing with all this stuff. So. Was it sudden? It seemed like it happened, but I mean, it wasn't like he was sick with cancer in bed for a year in hospice or anything like that. No, he died overnight in his sleep.
And there was a lot of acrimony kind of coming out of that, cutting her out of the will. These 2 sons, his sons had called him out on Father's Day from, I think, his first marriage, that we never knew you because you weren't there. You didn't exist. It was, I'll leave it at this. As this person who went out of his way, in spite of all the beautiful music, to just cut people out. Your book just does an incredible job of illustrating the complexity and the dysfunction behind the scenes, in spite of all the music that I love. I mean, as you say, who doesn't love to get in a car and listen to, Let the Good Times Roll or Let Go or Moving in Stereo or even Magic or some of these other, But I'll leave you with this thought, because I know I can wonk out forever. As I told you, I could be like Chris Farley in that SNL thing with Paul McCartney or Sting, because I love this topic so much. And I really loved your book.
Oh, thank you.
How many different times can a person tell you this? The world needs, and I don't know if the 3 remaining guys of the Cars are ready, and I've been pitching it, I've been audibling it to people. They need the diaspora of all the people that they've mentored coming together to prepare a concert, filling in the blanks where Ben and Rick are no longer. For example, Rivers Cuomo of Weezer. You have Courtney Love. You have No Doubt and Gwen Stefani. You have Brandon Flowers.
You have Bill Janovitz.
You have all these people that have stepped up. And I want to put this out into the ether, into the great wide open, that this should be at the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. It should be an adaptation of your book and the history of the band and the oral history put together in the band members and the DJ Maxine and Beeb and everybody else coming together. And that documentary, that concert, that final video needs to be recorded somehow. I know it's going to cost money. I know you got to get the rights, but this is what I wanted to horse collar you about. I think the world definitely needs that documentary. And he's mentored so many people, and the Not a Surf guys love him so much, and Suicide and Weezer and No Doubt. And you talk about what Peter Buck of REM gave you a blurb on this, all of the various people that they helped. I mean, the Motels. I did not know about this long tail of generosity and mentoring that came out of this, this band's 10-year comet.
Oh yeah, for sure, and it really was. It was Rick's. But to this day, Elliot is still playing. That's how I met Elliot. Was him playing as part of this benefit. Yeah, but musicians want to be musicians, and they'll show up for wherever they can logistically and comfortably show up. I don't know if I can get them all to Cleveland for a reunion, but maybe.
But reading this, I realize it's more Boston. Boston was much more central to the band's history. It's just that Ben was from Cleveland.
Yeah.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame hosted them.
Yeah. If you can get a private jet for Elliot and bring him out here and get him back in by 8:00, so he can make his bedtime, I think we might have a possibility.
Well, what would be the venue today? Would it be in Back Bay? There's no Rat. There's no. You would have it in Boston. What is that place?
Oh, I think it would be big enough that
Harvard.
No, it would be big enough where we'd have to have it at probably the House of Blues, which is probably 1,500 people or something like that here, or MGM Music Hall, even better. It's a new place right outside of Fenway Park.
Dare me to pull this off. Let's see if I can. With your suasion and your reporting.
Let's do it.
Bill, I love this. Let's do it. Let's go.
Let's go.
Cars.
Yeah.
Let the Stories Be Told by Bill Janovitz, best-selling author of Leon Russell as well. And gosh, you're prolific. Are you in the real estate industry?
That's how I make my bread and butter. Yeah, I've been doing that for 25 years or something like that.
So you gig, you play bands, you're an incredible writer, you're an incredible investigator. Goodness.
None of it pays except for real estate.
I love your stuff, and as you could tell, I wonked out, and I'm grateful for it. I recommend the book to everybody. The Cars, Let the Stories Be Told. Bill Janovitz, you're welcome back on the show anytime.
Thanks so much, Robin. I really appreciate it.